when we had learned the understanding of the Amida, the Tefillah, the first blessing of the Shemon Esrei, we refer to God as Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. So we ask the question then, now, when does God refer to himself in these contexts? Hashem himself refers to himself, I am Elokei Avraham, I am the God of Abraham, I am Elokei Yitzchak, I am Elokei Yaakov. What is the meaning of that? I mean, it should say, I'm the God of all of them. But God, when he identifies himself, he identifies himself on this individualized basis. That means there was this unique relationship to Avram, a unique relationship to Yitzchak, and a unique relationship to Yaakov. What was the uniqueness of that relationship? So we explained then that each one of the patriarchs emulated God in another context in terms of his attributes. Avram emulated God in the context of Chesed. He was the pillar of loving kindness. Yitzchak was the ultimate level of exactness, precision, what we call the attribute of justice. Yaakov was Rachmin, was mercy. Chesed is indiscriminate kindness. Din, justice is you're deserving, you receive it. You don't deserve, you don't receive. Rachmim, mercy means although you don't receive, you don't deserve to receive, but there's a flexibility. We'll give you another chance. We'll give you time to pay it out. We'll dole it over an extended period of time. That's mercy. Justice is there's no mercy. Exactness. There's no delay of punishment. That's how what Yitzchak demanded of himself. Yitzchak is referred to, Isaac is referred to as the unblemished offering. He was brought at the time of the Akedah, the binding, as an unblemished offering. The ram was brought in his place. The unblemished ram was brought in the place of Yitzchak. It's very interesting. The Mishnah tells us in Pirkei Avos that there were a number of things that were created at the twilight period at the entry of Shabbos. One of the things that was created by God right before Shabbos began was the ram that was brought in the place of Yitzchak during the Akedah. It was a special ram. It wasn't just an ordinary ram. All the species already were created. But the ram that was brought in the place and the stead of Yitzchak was created right before that twilight period, at the entry point of Shabbos. It was a miracle ram. Now, when the ram was brought in the place of Yitzchak, and Avram brought that ram, he says, this ram, I'm slaughtering it as if I'm slaughtering my son Yitzchak. I receive its blood as if I'm receiving the blood of my son. I'm transporting it to the altar. I'm sprinkling it. When I burn it on the altar, it's as if I'm sacrificing my son. To actualize his intent, what he would have done to his son, it's being actualized through the ram. But you realize Yitzchak was a miracle too. Yitzchak was conceived when his mother was 89 years old. She was way past menopause. She was 90 years old when she gave birth to him. Avram was 100 years old when Yitzchak was a miracle child. Avram was willing to give up his miracle child, although God had promised him that he's the future of existence. He will be your successor as the patriarch. God says, bring him up as a burnt offering. Avram did not question. Without any hesitation, the Torah tells you he rose early in the morning with alacrity, and he was going to bring Yitzchak as that sacrifice. When he was bound and about to slaughter him, an angel calls from heaven and says, withdraw your hand from the lad. And all of a sudden he sees the ram caught in the thicket. He was going to give, which had greater value than anything in his life. This was the future of the world. This child was going to meet the objective of creation. And God brought about a miracle to bring that child into existence. Because Sarah was barren. She was barren and she was beyond menopause. He was aged. Despite that, Yitzhak was born. Because you were willing to give up that miracle child, which came about only through miracle, God will provide in its place a ram that was created specifically for this purpose. This is not the ordinary species, the ram, a male and a female. This is the ram that was created specifically to take the place of Yitzhak. So it's a miracle. Okay? We find that Chazal tell us, the Midrash tells us, that each one of the patriarchs, these are the words of the Midrash, Hein Hein Merkava. Like we have the Holy of Holies, which was the location of the divine presence in this world, until the Mishkan was built. Where was God's presence in this world? Elokei Avram. Wherever Avram was, that's where God was. Wherever Yitzchak was, that's where God was. Wherever Yaakov was, that's where God was. Each of them was the equivalent of the Holy of Holies. This Elokei Avraham. Where Avram was, this Elokei. The divine presence is there. Where Yitzchak is, it's Elokei. The divine presence is there. Where Yaakov is, the divine presence is there. The world itself came about through God's indiscriminate kindness. As King David says in Psalms, Olam Chesed Yiboneh. What precipitated creation was the attribute of Chesed. But where's God? God is in heaven, activating forces which bring about Chesed. Until Avram came on the scene, who emulated God's attribute of Chesed. Where is the divine presence? Who represents Chesed? Not on the terrestrial level. That's celestial. Avram, by emulating God to such an extent, he brought Chesed to the terrestrial level. The Shekhinah, the divine presence which dwells with Avram, represents Chesed in real time on the earthly level. God is precision in heaven. Yitzchak, emulating God. In this context, he brought it to earth. Yaakov, who emulated God in Rachmim through Torah, he brought Rachmim, mercy, to the terrestrial level. It's not God looks from his heavenly abode and offers mercy to mankind, but mankind is in real time on the earthly level. So we speak about Avram's Chesed. His Chesed wasn't, we say, like abstract or at a distance. Avram brought Chesed to real time. His behavior, it's unheard of. The way he hosted the angels, 3 wayfarers. He hosted them as if they were royalty. The man is the wealthiest man in the world. He was pronounced as the Prince of God. And he runs towards these 3 wayfarers and he prostrates himself before them. And he almost urges them to accept his hospitality. They're a bunch of vagabonds. Who are they? What do you mean? If they're needy and I could host their needs, and the Talmud tells us, although we said take a morsel of bread, have some water. This is we learn from Avram. Tzadikim, Omrim Ma'at. A tzaddik says very little. But what he delivers enormous amount of delivery. He fed him a banquet. At the height of King Solomon's power, that's kind of banquet they served. That's what Avram had offered the angels. He accommodated him. He gave him that sense of value to such a degree. As I always said, Chesed is not putting food in your mouth and giving and quenching your thirst. It's making you feel that you're somebody special. That's the Chesed. The Gemara tells us that a person who does charity, he's worthy of so many blessings. But if you speak to the person who you're going to help, you're worthy of 11 blessings. What does that mean? Person comes to your door, I'm needy, you give him the money. You give him the food, you give him the drink. He's needy. So what does he feel like? He feels that you're his benefactor, he's the beneficiary, comes with his hat in his hand like a beggar and walks away. But if he comes to your door and you say, by the way, what is your name? Who are you? Are you a family man? Where do you come from? What are you doing to that person? What are you communicating, person? That you have an interest in him as a person, as a human being. That, giving him that sense of value has tremendous value, even more than giving him the food and drink. Because everything is the sense of self. That was Avram. Avram gives us a model of what hospitality is. It's unheard of. Very often, I remember many years I had this discussion. A person, you say to your wife, I'm inviting a guest. Somebody was in shul, needs a place to eat. And I invited him to come to the home. And she says, fine. But the wife says to the husband, he's going to eat what we eat. Whatever we eat, that's what he's going to eat. So the husband says to the wife, but you realize real hospitality is to accommodate the guest in terms of what he wants to eat. It's not beggars can't be choosy. That used to be an old saying. Beggars can't be choosy. No, when you host a person, he's not a beggar. You don't treat him like a beggar. It's true. Beggars can't be choosy. But if you make him feel that he's somebody of status, you say, by the way, what would you prefer? Would you prefer fish? Would you prefer meat? What kind of meat? That is really the ultimate level of hospitality. You're interested in the person himself. That's true chesed. When God provides for an individual, he's not providing for A, what's meant to be for B, or B, what's meant to be for A. He provides for the person what's meant to be for that person. So if you emulate the attribute of loving kindness of God, how do you address that person's need? Based on who you are or based on what he needs? What his needs are. Remember many years ago, my father, Olav Shalom, davened in a certain shul. And I told you when I was a little boy, he used to take me sometimes to daven there. It was still dark. I was 5 years old. And there were old people there. And very poor people. People slept in the shul. They had nowhere to sleep. And he meets a person in shul. The person was passing through. And my father so clear he hadn't eaten for a while. And there's a question, even maybe he was lice infested. This person, he brings him home to my mother. My mother sees this guy coming through the door. And she says to my father, who you bring home? He says, look, this man's needy. He's passing through, he's going to Philadelphia. So my mother said, what should I make him for breakfast? Well, he wants scrambled eggs and rolls. So my mother had a few dozen eggs in the house and a dozen rolls. My mother made a dozen eggs for this person. He ate about 6 rolls, plus dessert and about 3 cups of coffee. And then my father gave him coffee that he should be able to go to Philadelphia. You understand? You know something? The average person eats 2 eggs, 3 eggs. How many rolls? You're eating the equivalent of 3 meals, or maybe more. When you accommodate a person, it's for the person. The man hasn't eaten, he needs it. That's what he wants. That's what I offer him. That's true hospitality. It's not the man was a glutton. It wasn't a glutton. It's clear the man was needy to the point he hadn't eaten for who knows how long. He was literally on the brink, not starvation, but evidently he hadn't had his stomach filled for a while. That's chesed. And the Torah gives us that model of chesed be'Avram Avinu. Initially, we had mentioned when God created all the species, the male and female were created at the same time. Chava, Eve, was created afterwards. Adam was created as a single unit. And the Torah tells us that God passed all the species before Adam, and he realized he has no counterpart. When he realized that he was needy and he needed a counterpart, God provided him with that wife. A deep sleep came upon him, and he took the side of Adam, and he created the woman. He built the woman from Adam. So when did he provide Adam with his counterpart, who was going to help him to supplement his ability or to complement his ability? Only once he realized he didn't have it. When he realized, now I provide it. So he did that. That was Chesed. Now, normally there's a custom among Jews when the bride and groom don't go to the chuppah, to the marriage canopy, they're escorted by the parents, or somebody escorts them down to the chuppah. God had taken Chava after he created her, as he was the person who accompanied her to present her to Adam. To show it's not you found your wife. No, this was created specifically for you to accommodate every level of your need. That was the chesed. I'll give you an example. I give you an allowance, and the allowance can cover anything you want. So the person who receives the allowance says to the one to his benefit, he says, "You mean to say you didn't order in that 5-star dinner from the restaurant for me?" You say to the person, that I gave you the money, that's not enough. Once I give it, it's up to you to buy the food. You want to buy it. If you don't want to buy, don't buy it. I should go and order it in for you. And I should get you the starch napkin to put into your shirt, that you shouldn't stain the brioni tie that I bought for you. I should be the one. What are you going to do for yourself? God didn't treat Adam this way. Created a Garden of Eden, brought him in, brought the wife into him, escorted her. This is the wife I've created for you. And he gives instructions. What level of chesed is this? It's displaying, it's not, I've done mine, now you do yours. There's a story. Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, Zechat Tzaddik Livrocha, spent 2 years in the United States. He was the closest student of the Chavetz Chaim, and he was one of the leading Torah sages in Europe. And he went back at the beginning of the war, and he was killed in the Kovna fort. It's known as Kiwanis fort. He was killed by the Nazis with all the Jews in Kovna. And when he was in the United States, he traveled throughout the United States, speaking about the value of Torah, the value of Judaism. Because the United States pre-World War II was in the boondocks. People, although they were observant, it was really on a traditional level. They had no understanding of what it really was. And him being a model of holiness and Torah greatness, the royalty of Torah, he spoke in many communities. So when he stayed in Manhattan when he was in New York, stayed on the West Side. There was a family named Golding. They hosted him, the Golding family. It's a known family, West Side family. Very wealthy family. They were in the textile business, and they were observant. And they provided a car and a driver for him. The driver was a yeshiva student who drove the rabbi around. Was that student would have a sensitivity to the needs of the rabbi. So he had to go to a certain address. So the young man says to the rabbi, "I'll drop you off in the corner. You walk a half a block and you find the location." That's what the driver says to him. So Rabbi Chanan Wasserman says to him, he says, "I want you to take me to the door." Why? Because when you do a mitzvah, you do chesed to its fullest extent. It's not that I need it for me. I could walk the half a block. But for you, Satan doesn't want you to do the mitzvah in the most complete way. He wants it to fall short of what chesed is. Chesed is you deliver fully. You serve a 4-course meal and you leave out dessert. Something. It's not the full meal. It's not the 5-course meal. You do chesed, you do it You're supposed to bring me to that address. I want you to bring it. For you, not for me. That's chesed. Because chesed, you do for the person. You don't do for yourself. It's what the person needs. Whether he needs a good word, whether he needs a position, whether he needs a loan, whether he needs a favor, whether he needs good advice, whatever it is, that's chesed. The Chofetz Chaim speaks about, in terms of the breakdown of chesed, it's many levels. Most people think, what's chesed? The acronym for chesed is gemach, gemilas chasodim. Gemilas chasodim. Acts of loving kindness. So most people, a free loan charity is called the gemach. They lend money without interest. So most people say, what's gemilas chesed? Lending money. But it surpasses it endless times over. It's a lot more than lending money. What about if you want to borrow a vessel? You want to borrow a garment? You want to borrow a bag of sugar? Whatever it is, that's chesed. I want to borrow your animal. I want to borrow your tool. That's chesed. What about, I said, could you come? I need a hand. Could you help me lift something? I have difficulty getting into my house. Maybe you could jiggle the lock with my key and open the lock. That's chesed. Chesed is not limited to finances. What about a person is not well, and we called Bikur Cholim, visiting the sick? That's chesed. What about Nichma Velim, God forbid? A person passes away and a person is sitting Shiva, and you go to console the mourner. That's chesed. What about, but that's chesed with the living. That's living with the living. But you can do chesed with the deceased. You attend the funeral. You're offering your last respects to the deceased. What about you eulogize that person who died, and you speak why he's special? That's chesed to the deceased. What about you go out to the cemetery, which is an inconvenience, because there are not enough people going out there, and you go out there. That's honoring the dead. What about they need people to close the grave, and you're going to shovel some of the dirt into the grave, that it should be an appropriate burial? That's chesed. We say the Torah closes with chesed. What's the closing event of chesed? God burying Moshe Rabbeinu. If God can do it, you mean you can't do it? It's beneath your dignity. Chas v'sholom. That's chesed. So you have chesed with the living. You have chesed with the deceased. The Ramak, Ramoshku Devira, which is a Kabbalistic work, it's known as the palm tree of Dvorah. The Ramak writes that even doing kindness with an insect, person sees an insect, you just kill it for the sake of killing it. It's not because it's going to infest your house. You walk on the sidewalk, and you go and you step on the insect, step on the spider, or whatever you do. It has no relevance to your life. What are you killing a living creature? Person goes and just cuts a branch off a tree, as they say, for the heck of it. God created something complete. Why are you destroying it? It's also the behavior itself. If you live a level of behavior on an exemplary level, you don't do anything just for the sake of doing it, unless it has constructive value. What's the point of killing the insect or the creature? There's a Torah violation. It's a question, was a Torah violation or not? What about causing undue harm to a living creature? It's called Tsar Bali Chaim. You overload an animal. An animal has a certain capacity. You overload it. It's called Tsar Bali Chaim. You have no right to cause undue harm, even to an unintelligible creature. You have no right. Why? Because David Melch says, and we say it in Ashrei, V'rachma vel kol masov, God's mercies on all his creation, even the unintelligent donkey. We find that the dog in Egypt, when the 10th plague came, God says, the dogs will not bark. And they didn't bark during the 10th plague. And God rewarded this unintelligible creature. It says, If you have meat which is found out in the field, an animal's killed, you take that meat and you feed it to the dog. That's reward for the dog that the dog didn't bark during the 10th plague, to indicate that it was God who brought about the 10th plague. What do we have to consider about a dog? Why don't you leave that to Purina, dog chow? Business with this. You got to provide the meat for the dog. Although Bob, first cut from the butcher, he treats the dog better than he treats himself. His kids come, it's third cut. The dog, first cut. Okay? And it's even Ashkenazic cuisine. It's not even Sephardic cuisine. You remember that. Okay. So the Torah, the first book of the Torah is literally overflowing with models of how we have to behave. The Torah is only sharing these stories with us to give us an understanding. What is the standard of a Jew? Just end with one incident we have in the Torah. Avram had a nephew. His name was Lot. He was a bad guy. When I say bad guy. He didn't have an iota of appreciation to his uncle. When he left Ur Kasdim, he came with his uncle. He took him as an adopted son. He went to Egypt, he took him with him. Avram became wealthy, Lot became wealthy. They come back to Canaan. They both have enormous flocks, and they have need for grazing lands. So what happens? Lot's shepherds, they take their flocks and they graze in other people's lands, which is called stealing. Could you, one moment, please? Hello? He comes back to Canaan, and his flocks are grazing in fields which are not his. Stealing. And there's an argument, a quarrel. The shepherds of Avram and the shepherds of Lot. Avram's sheep don't graze in anybody else's field. It's stealing. Lot justified it. And he tells Avram, don't tell me how to live my life. You ever hear such a thing? His uncle, who pulled him out of the brink, literally. Now all of a sudden he has his own means. He's a wealthy man. Just don't tell me how to behave. If I feel it's okay, I'll do it. Avram says, not a problem. What should have Avram done? He should have thrown him overboard. Avram says to him, you go to the right, I'll go to the left. You choose to go to the left, I'll go to the right. We have to part our ways. However, you should know, regardless of what happens to you, I'm always here for you, and I will always come to your aid. Always. Avram didn't say, you're misbehaving, you're an ingrate, I'm not going to look at you. Avram didn't say that. He said, and what happens? Where does he go? He goes to Sodom. This is literally the location on earth which they defy God, and defiantly they sin against God. That's where he goes. And what happens? He's taken captive by the four mightiest kings of the world. Now, who brought this disaster upon himself? If he would have stayed in the Beis Medrash with Avram, he wouldn't have been taken captive. You go to a casino and you have a brothel and you have everything going on over there. Then you have the FBI raiding. Then you get arrested. If he would have been the Beis Medrash, it wouldn't have happened. Avram said, doesn't make a difference. You're my nephew. I will come to your aid. And Avram had to resort to miracles to vanquish these four kingdoms. For what reason? To save this ingrate who was his nephew. You tell me what Chesed is. People say it doesn't make sense. Doesn't make a difference, make sense or not. I'm committed. He brought on himself. I will do Chesed. And he made a difference. But what did he do after he saved him? You know where he went back? Went back again to Sodom. People don't learn their lessons. And even at the end, when the angels came to destroy Sodom, one of the angels came to save Lot and his family. And why? In the merit of Avram. Because since he was Avram's nephew, in his merit, this character was saved. Could you imagine? So to what extent does a person have to put himself out to do Chesed? It's interesting. When I do chesed to a person, you have to because God wants you to. But who is going to pay you for that chesed? God is the benefactor. God says, if you're able to do that, although it goes against the grain, but it's the right thing to do, I will compensate you endlessly over for that. So you're never in arrears. When it comes to doing God's will, you're never in arrears, even though it seems to be that way. And people may say to you, you're a fool. They look at you like a buffoon. They look at you as like an archaic person. Doesn't make a difference how they look at you. It's the way God looks at you. My father, Allah Bashalom, my mother, like couples, they're married so many years, they get into disagreements. My father was the type of person, because the way he was brought up as an orphan, whenever he would see a person being abused, my father couldn't tolerate it. He was like a champion of the underdog. And my mother be going with him. All of a sudden, he meets a person, and he sees the person not acting appropriately. So he puts the person in his place, and he gets into a fight with him. Not a verbal. So my mother says, wherever I go with you, you're always fighting with everybody. This is what my mother says to my father. So my mother says, you realize nobody's going to like you. So my father says to my mother, as long as Hashem loves me, that's all that matters. I couldn't care less what people like me or don't like me. That was his retort to my mother. And that's the way he lived his life. Doesn't make a difference. Who's going to compensate you? With God, you're never in arrears. He's always there to give you what you deserve. We'll stop here. Any comments?